Okay, so this is going to sound insane. I need you to know that going in, because when I tell you that my daughter, the girl I raised for 18 years, the girl I nursed and burped and rocked to sleep and taught to ride a bike and drove to prom with, is not biologically mine, you are going to think I am making it up. I am not, and honestly, I wish I was. My name is Diana. I am 40 years old, and a year ago my entire life cracked in half because of a $79 DNA kit my daughter ordered from the internet as a fun mother-daughter activity. Here's how it happened. Kayla, that is my daughter. She is 18. She is obsessed with those ancestry websites. You know the ones. You spit in a tube, mail it off, and 6 weeks later it tells you that you are 43% Irish and 2% Scandinavian, and somehow related to a goat farmer in Norway. She had been bugging me for months. Mom, let us do it together. It will be fun. We can see if we are related to anyone cool. I said fine. I did not think about it. Why would I? She is my daughter. I was there when she was born. I watched her come into the world in room 412 at Mercy General on a rainy Tuesday in November. I held her before anyone else. I counted her fingers and her toes. 10 and 10, everything perfect. The nurse wrapped her up and put her on my chest, and she looked up at me with these dark little eyes, and I thought, okay, this is it. This is the person I'm going to love for the rest of my life. 18 years later, she ordered the DNA kit. We both spit in our tubes at the kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon. She sealed them up, put on a stamp, and dropped them in the mailbox. She was giddy. I was making lasagna. 6 weeks later, the results came back. Kayla opened hers first. She was reading off percentages. Mom, I am 28% Italian. That is from Dad's side. And then she went quiet. Really quiet. The kind of quiet that fills a room. She looked at me. She looked at her phone. She looked at me again. Mom, it says we are not related. I laughed. I actually laughed. That is a mistake. Those things are not always accurate. No, Mom. It says 0% shared DNA. We are not. It says we are not biologically related at all. I took her phone. I read the results. I read them again. I read them a third time, and the lasagna burned because I stood in that kitchen holding my daughter's phone for 20 minutes while the oven timer screamed and I could not move. The first thing I did was order another kit, different company. We did it again. This time I was not making lasagna. I was sitting at the table at 2 in the morning staring at the wall. The second results came back 3 weeks later. Same thing, 0% shared DNA. Kayla and I are not biologically related. I called Mercy General. I asked to speak to someone in medical records. I told the woman on the phone what happened. There was a long silence. Then she said, "Ma'am, I am going to need to transfer you to our legal department." That is when I knew this was real, because hospitals do not transfer you to legal when the answer is, "Oh, that is just a glitch." Let me tell you something about the first few weeks after we found out. It is not like the movies. There is no dramatic music. There is no clear villain. There is just this fog, this thick, disorienting fog where everything you thought was true is suddenly a question. I would look at Kayla across the dinner table and think, "You are my daughter. You are. I raised you. I know your laugh and your fears and the way you chew your lip when you're nervous. None of that is fake. But also, whose eyes are those? Whose chin? Whose blood is running through your veins?" Kayla handled it differently than me. She got angry, not at me, at the situation. She said, "I do not care what the DNA says. You are my mom. End of story." She said it with such fierceness that I almost believed it was that. Simple, but it was not simple, because somewhere out there was a woman who gave birth to me. I mean, who gave birth to the baby that was supposed to be mine. And somewhere there was a woman raising my biological daughter without knowing it. I hired a private investigator. His name was Frank Coelho, retired detective. No nonsense guy who wore the same brown jacket every time I saw him. He pulled the birth records from Mercy General for November 19th, the day Kayla was born. There were 6 deliveries that day. He cross-referenced the records with the DNA results and narrowed it down to 2 babies born within an hour of each other in adjacent delivery rooms. The other mother's name was Sandra Okonkwo. She was 41. She lived 40 minutes away. She was a dental hygienist. She had a daughter named Zoe who was, like Kayla, 18 years old. Frank found her. He called her. She did not believe him. I mean, why would she? Some stranger calls you and says your daughter might not be yours. You hang up. She hung up 3 times. The 4th time Frank said, "Ma'am, please just do a DNA test. If I am wrong, I will personally apologize. If I am right, you need to know." Sandra did the test with Zoe. The results came back in 3 weeks. Zoe was not Sandra's biological daughter. Sandra and I had each been raising the other's biological child for 18 years. Sandra called me. It was a Wednesday evening. I remember because I was folding a laundry, which is what I always do when I do not know what to do with my hands. She said, "Is this Diana?" I said yes. She said, "I think we need to talk." And then we were both quiet for a very long time. 2 mothers on the phone, listening to each other breathe. trying to figure out how to begin a conversation that no one should ever have to have. We met at a diner, neutral ground. I brought Kayla. She brought Zoe. The four of us sat in a booth and stared at each other. Zoe looked like me. That was the first thing I noticed. My nose, my jawline, the same dimple on the left cheek that I have, that my mother had, that my grandmother had. She was sitting across from me, wearing a college sweatshirt and looking terrified. And she had my face. Kayla was looking at Sandra the same way. Sandra has these beautiful dark eyes, warm, deep set, and Kayla has the exact same ones. They look nothing like mine. Nobody spoke for about 5 minutes. Then Sandra said, "I do not know what we're supposed to do." And I said, "I do not either." And Kayla said, "Can we at least order food? I am starving." And somehow that broke the ice, because we all laughed. This terrible, inappropriate, wonderful laugh that came from a place of pure exhaustion. We talked for 3 hours. We compared delivery times, room numbers, nurses. Sandra was in room 414. I was in room 412. Our babies were born 47 minutes apart at some point during the night. And this is where it gets blurry, because hospital records from 18 years ago are not exactly pristine. The babies were taken to the nursery. They were weighed, measured, given ID bracelets, and then they were brought back, except they were brought back to the wrong rooms. Sandra and I filed a joint lawsuit against Mercy General. We hired an attorney named Lorraine Kessler, who specialized in medical malpractice. Lorraine had handled one other baby swap case in her career 20 years ago, and she said it haunted her. She took ours with a kind of quiet fury that I trusted immediately. The hospital's legal team responded with what you would expect. They denied everything at first. Then when the DNA evidence was irrefutable, they shifted to damage control. Their attorney, a man named Philip North, argued that it was an isolated incident caused by a procedural lapse during a high-volume shift. He used the phrase "unfortunate error" 7 times. I counted. An unfortunate error, like they had overcharged us for parking instead of giving us the wrong children. Lorraine presented our case methodically. She showed the DNA results. She showed the birth records. She showed the floor plans of the maternity ward. Rooms 412 and 414 were directly across the hall from each other, separated by less than 20 feet. She showed that on the night of November 19th, the ward was understaffed, 2 nurses covering 6 deliveries, when the standard ratio was 1 nurse per 2 patients. She also showed that the ID bracelets, the little plastic bands they put on newborns, had been printed on a thermal printer that was known to produce faded, hard-to-read text. The hospital had received 3 maintenance requests for that printer in the 6 months before our deliveries. None had been addressed. Then Lorraine presented something that changed the entire tone of the hearing. She showed a pattern. 3 other families had filed complaints about maternity ward mix-ups at Mercy General in the decade before our daughters were born. Not baby swaps, but wrong bracelets, babies delivered to wrong rooms temporarily, records filed under incorrect patient names. The hospital had known the system was flawed. They had known for years, and they had done nothing. North tried to object. The judge overruled. Then something happened that nobody expected. A woman stood up in the back of the courtroom. She was in her 60s. She was wearing a plain coat and flat shoes, and she was shaking. She said, "Your Honor, my name is Margaret Colvin. I was a nurse at Mercy General for 22 years. I was on duty the night these babies were born." The courtroom went still. North immediately objected. He said she was not on the witness list. Lorraine said she had not known about her until that moment. The judge allowed her to speak. Margaret walked to the front. She sat in the witness chair and folded her hands the way people do when they are about to say something they have been holding for a very long time. "I was working a double shift that night," she said. "We were short-staffed. 2 nurses for 6 deliveries. I was exhausted. I had been on my feet for 14 hours. She paused. "When I brought the babies back from the nursery, I was carrying both of them. That is not protocol. You are supposed to bring one at a time. But we were behind, and the other nurse was in a delivery, and I was trying to catch up." She stopped again. Her hands were trembling. "I brought the wrong babies to the wrong rooms. I realized it about an hour later. The bracelets were faded and I could not read them clearly, but something felt wrong. I went to the charge nurse and told her I thought I might have made a mistake." The courtroom was dead silent. The charge nurse told me to keep quiet. She said if we reported it, the hospital would face liability. She said we would both be fired. She said, and I remember her exact words, "They are newborns. Nobody can tell the difference. Leave it alone." Margaret started crying. "I have lived with this for 18 years. I changed jobs. I moved. I stopped nursing. I could not look at a baby without thinking about what I had done. When I saw this case in the news, I knew I had to come." She looked at me, then at Sandra. "I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I should have said something. I should have fought harder. I was scared and I was tired and I listened to the wrong person. And and 2 families paid the price. I do not remember exactly what happened after that. I know Sandra was crying. I know Kayla was holding my hand. I know Lorraine asked Margaret a series of follow-up questions that confirmed every detail. I know North looked like he wished the floor would open up and swallow him. The judge called a recess. When we came back, she did not mince words. This court finds that Mercy General Hospital bears full responsibility for the misidentification and exchange of 2 newborn infants on November 19th, 18 years ago. This was not an isolated incident. It was a foreseeable consequence of systemic understaffing, faulty equipment, and a deliberate institutional decision to conceal a known error. She looked at North. The phrase "unfortunate error" is insufficient. This was a choice made by individuals within the hospital to protect the institution at the expense of 2 families who deserve the truth. She awarded damages. The number was significant, but I am not going to tell you what it was because the money is not the point. The money will never be the point. You cannot put a price on 18 years. You cannot write a check that covers the first steps you never saw your biological child take, or the late-night fevers of a daughter who was supposed to be yours, or the moment you look at a teenager and realize her dimples belong to someone else. After the hearing, Sandra and I stood in the parking lot for a long time. The girls were sitting on a bench, nearby, talking. Kayla and Zoe, my daughter and my daughter, both of them, different but both mine in the way that matters. Sandra said, "What do we do now?" I said, "I have no idea." She said, "Do you want to come over for dinner sometime?" I said yes. That was 4 months ago. We have dinner together every other week now. All 4 of us. Sandra makes jollof rice, which is incredible. I make lasagna, which is decent. Kayla and Zoe are becoming friends, not sisters. Not yet, maybe not ever, but something. Something that did not exist before and is slowly finding its shape. Kayla is still my daughter. I did not raise her from a test tube. I raised her from a Tuesday afternoon in November when a nurse put a baby in my arms, and I said, "This one is mine." And she was. She is. DNA does not get a vote on that. But Zoe is my daughter too, in a way that is harder to explain and harder to hold. She is the person who carries my genes, but not my memories. She is the question I never knew, was supposed to ask. Sandra feels the same way about Kayla. I can see it in the way she watches her at dinner, studying her hands, her expressions, the way she tilts her head when she's listening. Sandra is looking for herself in Kayla's face, the same way I look for myself in Zoe's. Margaret Colvin, the nurse, sent me a letter after the hearing. It was handwritten, 2 pages. I will not share all of it, but she said something at the end that I think about every day. She said, "I have spent 18 years hating myself for what I did, but meeting you and your daughter, both of your daughters, I realized that what I broke was not unfixable. It was just delayed. You found each other. That is what matters." She is wrong about one thing. It is not just about finding each other. It is about figuring out what to do now that we have. And that part, the hard, messy, beautiful, confusing part, is still happening, one dinner at a time. If you are listening to this and you think you know your family, you think you know your blood, your history, your story, hold it loosely, because sometimes the truth is hiding in a $79 test kit on a Sunday afternoon. And sometimes the strongest families are not the ones that share DNA. They are the ones that share dinner tables. Kayla still calls me Mom. Zoe calls me Diana. Both of those feel right. And somewhere in between those 2 names is a truth I am still learning to hold. That motherhood is not one thing. It is everything. It is the blood and the choice and the burned lasagna and the 18 years and the parking lot conversation where 2 strangers decide to become family because they already are. I do not remember the accident. I know that sounds like a cop-out, like something people say when they do not want to talk about it, but I genuinely do not remember. The last thing I remember before the coma is putting gas in my car at a Shell station on Route 9 and thinking I needed to buy milk. On the way home, then nothing. 14 months of absolutely nothing. And when I woke up, if you can call it waking up, because it was more like being slowly dragged back into a world I did not recognize, I found out that my husband had declared me dead, collected $350,000 in life insurance, sold our house, and married someone else. So, that is where we are starting. My name is Elena Marsh. I am 36 years old. Technically, for about 8 months of last year, I was dead. Not actually dead, but legally dead, because my husband Brian filed a petition with the court to have me declared deceased, citing prolonged absence of vital cognitive function and no reasonable expectation of recovery. He had a doctor sign off on it, he had a lawyer process the paperwork, and he had a new girlfriend waiting in the wings, which I am sure had nothing to do with the timing. Okay, let me back up, because I am telling this out of order, which is sort of what happens when 14 months of your life is a blank. The accident was on March 3rd. I was driving home from work. I am a physical therapist, or I was, at a clinic about 20 minutes from our house. A kid ran a red light in a pickup truck. He hit the driver's side of my car at about 45 miles per hour. I do not remember the impact. I do not remember the ambulance. I do not remember anything until October of the following year, when I opened my eyes in a hospital room that smelled like bleach and heard a nurse say, "Oh my God, she's awake." 14 months, 427 days. I lost a year and a half of my life, and the world did not wait for me to come back before it moved on. Here's what happened while I was gone. I am going to tell you this the way I learned it, which was piece by piece over several weeks, because the doctors did not want to give me too much at once. They said my brain needed time to adjust. What they meant was, the truth might actually kill you if we tell it all at once. Brian visited me in the hospital for the first 3 months. The nurses told me that. He came every day at first, then every other day, then twice a week, then once a week. By month 4, he was coming once every 2 weeks. By month 6, he stopped entirely. At month 8, he filed the petition. He told the court I was in a persistent vegetative state with no brain activity and no chance of recovery. The doctor who signed the supporting affidavit was, and I swear I am not making this up, a general practitioner Brian played golf with. Not a neurologist, not a coma specialist, a family doctor who plays golf on Wednesdays. The court granted the petition. I was declared legally dead on November 12th. Brian collected the life insurance, $350,000. He sold our house for $410,000. He moved to a new place, and 3 months later, he married a woman named Jessica, who he had apparently been seeing since month 5 of my coma. I learned all of this in a hospital bed, wearing a gown that was not mine, eating Jell-O through a straw, while a social worker explained it to me like she was reading from a very sad instruction manual. The first thing I said when she finished was, "Is my cat okay?" She said, "What?" "My cat, Mr. Whiskers, orange tabby, very fat. Where is he?" She did not know. Nobody knew. It turned out Brian had given Mr. Whiskers to a shelter 3 days after I was declared dead. The shelter had adopted him out to a family in New Jersey. I tracked him down 4 months later. He is fine. He is fatter. Anyway, when I was stable enough to leave the hospital, which took another 2 months of physical therapy, because 14 months of not moving your body turns your muscles into something between wet noodles and sadness. I had to figure out what to do. I had no house, no money, no husband, no legal identity, technically, because I was dead. Getting undeclared dead is, by the way, an unbelievably annoying bureaucratic process. You have to file a petition to revoke the declaration of death, provide proof that you are alive, which like, "Hi, I am standing right here." Is that not enough? And then wait for a judge to officially say, "Yes, this person is not dead." It took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of being technically a ghost. I should tell you about the first time I looked in a mirror after waking up. Nobody warns you about that. They tell you about the muscle atrophy and the feeding tube and the physical therapy. Nobody mentions the mirror. Paula brought me a compact mirror about a week after I woke up. I asked for it because I wanted to see my hair. Stupid reason, right? 14 months in a coma and I am worried about my hair. But that is how the brain works. It grabs onto small, manageable things because the big things are too much to process. I opened the compact and I did not recognize myself. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way. In a slow, creeping way. Like looking at a photograph of someone who looks sort of like you, but is not quite right. My face was thinner. My skin was different. My eyes looked older. Not just tired, but older. Like they had aged without me. The strangest part was realizing that I had been gone for 14 months, but my body had been here the whole time, existing, breathing, aging, getting older without my permission. Time kept going. My hair grew. My nails grew. The world spun. And I was not there for any of it. When I finally got access to a phone and looked at the date, I had this moment, just a flash, but it was overwhelming, where I thought I missed everything. An entire spring, an entire summer, an entire fall. The leaves changed without me. Christmas happened without me. People went to work and came home and ate dinner and watched television, and I was lying in a bed with tubes in my arms, and nobody was waiting for me to come back. Well, Paula was. Paula was waiting. She told me later that she talked to me every visit. She read me articles from magazines. She played music. My favorite playlist, the one with all the Fleetwood Mac and Joni Mitchell. She said she did not know if I could hear, but she figured it could not hurt. I do not know if I heard her, but I know this. When I woke up, the first song that came into my head was Landslide, and that was the last song on the playlist. During that time, I stayed with my sister, Paula, who had been visiting me in the hospital the entire time Brian had been busy remarrying. Paula is 4 years older than me and has the kind of energy that makes you feel like everything is going to be fine, even when everything is objectively on fire. She gave me her spare bedroom, fed me soup, and said, "When you are ready, We are going to destroy that man in court. I was ready on a Tuesday. I hired a lawyer named Catherine Voss. She was in her 50s, had a raspy voice from what I assume was either too much coffee or too many years of yelling at opposing counsel. And she had this way of looking at you over her reading glasses that made you feel like everything you said was the most important thing she had ever heard. She took my case on contingency because her words. I have been practicing law for 28 years, and I have never had a client who was literally back from the dead. We filed 3 claims. First, fraud. Brian had filed a death declaration using a doctor who was not qualified to assess my condition. Second, theft. The life insurance payout was obtained under false pretenses. Third, unjust enrichment. Brian had sold marital property while I was alive and kept all the proceeds. Brian's lawyer was a guy named Keith Donovan. He was youngish, overdressed, and had the confidence of someone who had never lost a case, probably because he had only handled about 6. His defense was creative, I will give him that. He argued that Brian had acted in good faith based on medical advice, that the petition was a reasonable response to an unbearable situation, that Brian had grieved genuinely before moving on. Grieved genuinely. The man collected a check and got married. That is not grief. That is efficiency. The hearing was in April. I showed up with Catherine and a walker because my left leg was still not great. Brian was across the aisle. I had not seen him since before the accident. He looked different, thinner, older. He also looked like a man who had just seen a ghost, which technically he had. Jessica was in the gallery, the new wife. She looked confused, which was apparently her permanent state since learning that her husband's first wife was not, in fact, dead. I actually felt bad for Jessica. She did not know. Brian had told her I died in the accident. He had told her a whole story, a funeral, a burial, a period of mourning. None of it was true. There was no funeral because you do not usually have funerals for people who are alive in a hospital bed. Catherine presented our case. She showed Brian's visitation records, the steady decline from daily to nothing. She showed the petition and the affidavit from the golf buddy doctor. She showed that Brian had not consulted a neurologist, had not requested a second opinion, and had filed the death declaration less than 5 months after stopping visits entirely. She showed the life insurance payout, the house sale, the new marriage, the timeline that made it very clear Brian had not been grieving. He had been planning. Then she showed text messages between Brian and Jessica, obtained through discovery, messages that started at month 5 of my coma, messages that included gems like, "She is never waking up, the doctor said so," and "Once the insurance comes through, we can get a place together." And the one that made the judge visibly react, "I just need her to stay under long enough for the declaration to go through. After that, it is done. I just need her to stay under long enough." Catherine read it out loud, twice. She did not need to read it twice. She just wanted to. Brian's lawyer asked for a recess. The judge said no. The judge ruled in my favor on all counts. She ordered Brian to repay the full life insurance amount. She ordered a 50% split of the house sale proceeds. She voided the death declaration retroactively, which meant, and this is my favorite legal detail, that Brian's marriage to Jessica was technically void, because you cannot marry someone new while your first spouse is alive, whether or not you think she is dead. After the ruling, Brian tried to talk to me in the hallway. He started with, "Elena, you have to understand. I thought you were..." I held up my hand. "Brian, I was in a coma, not dead. There is a difference, and you knew it." He did not say anything. He just stood there, looking like a man who had just realized that the shortcut he took led off a cliff. Jessica was standing, about 20 feet away. She was crying. I walked over to her, slowly, because the walker does not do fast, and I said, "I am sorry. You did not deserve this either." She looked at me and said, "He told me you were buried in Hillside Cemetery." "I know. I have been to Hillside. It is a nice cemetery. I am just not in it." She almost laughed. "Almost. I am alive. That is the headline. I am alive. I have a new apartment. I am back at work part-time. My left leg is getting stronger. Mr. Whiskers is back. The family in New Jersey gave him up because he was, quote, too fat and too loud, so at least one thing has not changed. Brian is paying restitution monthly. Jessica filed for annulment. The golf buddy doctor is under review by the medical board, and I am eating lasagna on Tuesday nights with my sister, who says, "You know, most people just get divorced. You had to come back from the dead." If you are listening to this and someone tells you that a person you love is never coming back, whether it is a coma, a diagnosis, a situation that seems impossible, do not give up. Do not file the paperwork. Do not sell the house. Do not collect the check, because sometimes people wake up, and when they do, they remember everything, including who was there and who was not. You know what the worst part is? It is not that he lied. People lie all the time. It is that he lied about the one thing that mattered to me. My student, the boy I taught for free because his family could not afford lessons. The boy I drove to his first recital in my own car because his mother did not have one. That boy, now a grown man with a career and a record deal and a Wikipedia page, sat on national television and said he taught himself to play piano. And the interviewer smiled and said, "Self-taught? That is remarkable." And I was sitting on my couch in my living room in the same house where I gave him lessons for 6 years, and I said out loud to nobody, "That is not true." My name is Gloria. I am 55 years old. I have been a piano teacher for 30 years, not the kind of piano teacher who teaches at a conservatory or a university, the kind who teaches in her living room. I have an upright Baldwin that my mother bought used in 1978. It is out of tune in the upper register, and the B flat below middle C sticks if you hit it too hard, but it works, and has taught more kids than I can count. I charge $30 a lesson. That is below market rate, I know that. But most of my students come from the neighborhood, and most families in the neighborhood do not have conservatory money. They have, "My kid heard a song on the radio, and now she wants to play" money. And that is enough, because music does not care how much you paid for it. Music only cares that you showed up. Darius Cole showed up on a Thursday afternoon in September. He was 10, skinny, big eyes, nervous in the way that kids are nervous when they are doing something they desperately want to be good at but are afraid they will not be. His mother Wanda stood behind him on my porch and said, "Mrs. Hayes, my son says he wants to learn piano. I cannot pay much. Can you help?" I looked at Darius. He was staring at the piano through the screen door like it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. I said, "Come on in." For the first year, Darius came twice a week. Wanda paid when she could. Sometimes the full 30, sometimes 10, sometimes nothing. I did not keep track. That is not why I teach. I teach because there's a moment, usually about 3 or 4 months in, when a student's hands stop fighting the keys and start talking to them. When the music stops being a puzzle and starts being a language. That moment is worth more than any check. Darius hit that moment faster than any student I had ever taught. By 6 months, he was playing Chopin. Not well, but recognizably. By a year, he was playing it beautifully. He had something I cannot teach, an instinct for phrasing, for dynamics, for the space between notes. He played the way some people breathe, naturally, without thinking. I taught him for 6 years, from age 10 to 16. We went through everything, classical, jazz, blues, some gospel because Wanda went to church and wanted him to play there on Sundays. I wrote lesson plans for him. I marked up sheet music with fingering and phrasing notes. I bought him books when he finished the ones I had. I drove him to 3 recitals because Wanda's car was not reliable, and the bus did not go that far. When Darius was 16, he told me he had been accepted into a performing arts high school on the other side of the city, full scholarship. He was leaving the neighborhood. He hugged me at his last lesson and said, "Mrs. Hayes, I could not have done any of this without you." That was the last time I saw him. Darius went on to do extraordinary things. He won competitions. He got a degree from Juilliard. He signed with a major label. He released an album of original compositions that critics called transcendent. He played at Carnegie Hall. He was profiled in magazines. He was, by any measure, a success story. And in every interview, every profile, every bio, every Wikipedia entry, the same line appeared. Self-taught pianist who grew up in a low-income neighborhood and discovered music on his own. Self-taught. No mention of me. No mention of 6 years of lessons. No mention of Mrs. Hayes and the out-of-tune Baldwin in her living room. I want to be honest. The first time I saw that line, I told myself it did not matter. He made it. That is what matters. Who cares if he mentions me? I teach kids to play piano. I do not do it for credit, but it kept happening. Interview after interview, profile after profile, and each time the story got more elaborate. He found an old keyboard in a dumpster and taught himself from YouTube videos. He spent hours alone in empty churches, figuring out chords by ear. It was a beautiful story, inspiring. The only problem was that it was not true. The YouTube thing especially stung. Darius started lessons with me in 2006. YouTube had barely figured out how to buffer a video in 2006. Nobody was learning Chopin from a YouTube tutorial in 2006. I want to tell you about the recital, the first one, because that is the memory that hurts the most when I think about what Darius said on television. He was 12. The recital was at a community center about 20 minutes from my house. There were maybe 40 people in the audience. Parents, siblings, a few grandparents. It was not Carnegie Hall. It was a room with the folding chairs and a rented Yamaha that needed tuning and a paper program that I had printed at the library because the community center's printer was broken. Darius was playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Opus 9, number 2. the one that everybody knows, the one that sounds like moonlight feels. He had been working on it for 3 months. He was ready, but he was also 12 and terrified. I drove him there because Wanda's car had a flat tire. He sat in the passenger seat and did not talk the whole way. His hands were in his lap, opening and closing, stretching his fingers the way I had taught him. When we got there, he looked at the building and said, "Mrs. Hayes, what if I mess up?" I said, "Then you keep going. The audience does not know the score. They only know what you play. If you miss a note, you just play the next one like you meant it." He nodded. He got out of the car. He played beautifully, not perfectly. He rushed the middle section the way he always did, and he missed the pause in measure 37, which he still misses to this day apparently, but beautifully. When he finished, the room was quiet for a second, and then everyone clapped, and Darius looked at me from the piano bench and smiled. This big, wide, relieved, happy smile. I drove him home. Afterward, he was buzzing with energy, talking fast, saying things like, "Did you hear that part where I did the thing? And Mrs. Hayes, can we learn something harder?" He was alive in a way I had not seen before, like someone had turned on a light inside him. When we pulled up to his house, Wanda was standing on the porch waiting. Darius ran inside to tell her about it. I stayed in the car for a minute. I was not going to go in, but Wanda waved me over. She said, "Mrs. Hayes, thank you. I have never seen him this happy." I said, "He is talented, Wanda, really talented." She said, "I know, and he has you to thank for that." That is the memory, the 12-year-old boy and the Yamaha and the folding chairs, the smile from the piano bench, the mother on the porch. That is what Darius erased when he said, self-taught. Not 6 years of lessons, 6 years of moments like that one. I let it go for years. I am not a confrontational person. I do not sue people. I do not make scenes. I play piano, and I teach kids, and I eat dinner alone, and I go to bed. That is my life. Then something happened that I could not let go. A journalist from a national magazine called me. She was writing a feature on Darius. She said she had heard a rumor that he had a piano teacher growing up, and she wanted to verify. I told her the truth. I told her about the 6 years, the lessons, the recitals, the sheet music I still had in a folder in my piano bench. The article came out a month later. The journalist included one line about me. One line, and Darius's publicist issued a statement saying, "Mr. Cole respects all the mentors who may have played a small role in his early development, but his artistry is self-cultivated." A small role, 6 years, twice a week, from nothing to Chopin. A small role. That is when I hired a lawyer, a man named Dennis Rooney, who was a music teacher himself before he went to law school. He understood. He took the case for a reduced fee. We did not file for money. I do not want money. I filed a claim for public correction and moral damages. I wanted the record set straight, that is all. I wanted Darius to acknowledge, publicly, that he had a teacher, that someone sat beside him on a bench for 6 years and taught him how to read music and shape a phrase and listen, really listen, to what the piano was trying to say. Darius's legal team pushed back hard. His entertainment lawyer, a woman named Carla Stein, argued that musical instruction is one of many influences and that Darius's self-taught narrative was a branding decision protected under artistic license. Artistic license. For a lie. The hearing was in November. I brought my folder, 31 pieces of sheet music with my handwritten annotations in the margins, fingering numbers, dynamic markings, notes like "slow down here" and "feel the pause." I brought 6 years of lesson schedules written in my planner. I brought 3 photographs from recitals, one of Darius at age 12, sitting at a piano with my hand on his shoulder. Dennis presented everything. He argued that my documented, sustained contribution to Darius's musical development constituted a meaningful and verifiable relationship that Darius had publicly and repeatedly denied for personal branding purposes, causing emotional harm. Then Carla presented Darius's defense, the self-taught narrative, the artistic license argument. She even brought a musicologist who testified that some aspects of Darius's style were inconsistent with classical training, which was her way of saying he is too good to have had a teacher, which is the most backwards compliment I have ever heard. The judge listened to both sides. Then she asked if Darius himself would like to make a statement. He stood up. He was wearing an expensive suit. He looked nothing like the 10-year-old who stood on my porch, and everything like him at the same time. He opened his mouth. He was about to say something rehearsed. I could see it on his face. The polished, practiced expression of a man who has been media trained. And then a voice from the gallery interrupted. "Darius Jamil Cole, You sit down and tell the truth. Wanda, his mother, sitting in the third row in a church hat and a winter coat. She had driven 3 hours to be there. Nobody had asked her to come. Darius looked at her. The practiced expression crumbled. Wanda stood up. She did not ask permission. She just stood up and started talking. Mrs. Hayes taught my son to play piano for 6 years. She did not charge me when I could not pay. She drove him to recitals. She bought him books with her own money. She believed in him when nobody else did, including me, because I did not think piano was a real career. She looked at Darius. You know what she did for you. You know. And you sat on that television and said you taught yourself because your publicist told you it was a better story. Well, it is not a better story. It is a lie. And I did not raise you to be a liar. Darius did not speak for a long time. The courtroom was very quiet. Then he looked at me, and I saw the 10-year-old again, just for a second. Mrs. Hayes, he said, I am sorry. You taught me everything. I should have said that a long time ago. The judge adjourned the case. A settlement was reached the next week. Darius issued a public statement acknowledging my role in his musical development. He updated his bio. He mentioned me by name in his next interview. He also established a scholarship fund for music students in the neighborhood, the Gloria Hayes Music Foundation. I did not ask for the foundation. I did not ask for anything except the truth. Darius called me after the settlement. He said, "Can I come for a lesson?" I said, "The B flat still sticks." He said, "I know. I always kind of like that about it." He came the following Thursday. He sat at my Baldwin and played for an hour. Chopin, the same piece I taught him when he was 12. He played it better than I have ever heard anyone play anything. When he finished, I said, "You missed the pause in measure 37. He laughed. "You always say that because you always miss it. If you are listening to this and you are a teacher, music, math, science, anything, and a former student has gone on to do something extraordinary without mentioning you, I know how that feels. It feels like being erased, like the hours and the patience and the belief you poured into someone evaporated the moment they walked out the door. But here is what I know after 30 years of teaching. The work was never about credit. The work was about the moment a child's hands stop fighting the keys and start talking to them. That moment exists whether or not anyone says your name, but it is still nice when they do." The bride's lawyer adjusted his glasses and said, "Your Honor, my client's position is that the arrangement was exposure-based. The work was displayed at a high-profile event with significant social media reach. That exposure constitutes adequate compensation." He said, "Exposure like it was a real thing. Like I could take exposure to the electric company and say, 'Here, this should cover October.'" I was sitting at the table in a blazer I borrowed from my sister because all my nice clothes smell like flower water and pollen. And I was thinking, this woman is telling a judge that Instagram likes should pay my rent. My name is Marisol. I am 31 years old. I am a florist. Not the kind who works behind a counter at a chain store wrapping roses in cellophane for Valentine's Day, though I have done that too. I design floral arrangements for events, weddings mostly. I build things with flowers, centerpieces, arches, installations that take 2 days to construct and 4 hours to admire before someone throws the bouquet and everybody goes home. I have been doing this for 9 years, ever since I dropped out of a business degree and realized that the only thing I actually cared about was making beautiful things out of things that die. Flowers are temporary. That is what I love about them. You get them for a few days and then they are gone, so you have to make those days count. Every petal, every stem, every arrangement. I work alone, no team, no studio. I operate out of my apartment in a rented storage unit where I keep my supplies, wire, foam, ribbon, vases. The enormous cooler I bought used from a restaurant that went under during the pandemic. I drive a van that I painted sage green because I thought it would look professional, and it mostly just looks like an avocado on wheels. I built my business through word of mouth and Instagram. I have about 14,000 followers, which in the florist world is decent but not famous. I post my work because that is how clients find me. That is how Sloane Whitaker found me. Sloane Whitaker is, how do I put this? Sloane Whitaker is the kind of person who has never heard the word no in a context that applied to her. She is 29, comes from money that goes back generations, and was planning a wedding with a budget of $200,000. The venue was a restored estate in the Hudson Valley, 300 guests, a live orchestra, custom stationery that probably cost more than my van. She found me through Instagram. She sent a DM that said, "Obsessed with your work. I need you for my wedding. Name your price." I quoted her $18,000. That is high for me, but the wedding was massive. Ceremony arch, 12 table centerpieces, 2 large installations for the reception entrance, bouquets for the bridal party, plus setup and teardown. It was 3 weeks of work. She agreed immediately. We signed a contract. She paid a $5,000 deposit. I started sourcing flowers, garden roses from Ecuador, peonies from a grower in Oregon, olive branches from a farm upstate. This was going to be the biggest job of my career. The wedding was in June. I arrived at the venue at 5 in the morning, with my van packed so full I could not see out the back window. I worked for 11 hours straight. The ceremony arch alone took 4 hours. 600 stems woven into a structure I had designed specifically for the way the afternoon light came through the trees on that particular hillside. I know that sounds obsessive. It is. That is what makes it good. By 4 in the afternoon, everything was done. The venue looked like something from a dream. The tables glowed with soft color. The arch framed the aisle like a painting. The reception entrance had 2 cascading installations that hung from the ceiling and moved gently in the breeze through the open doors. Sloan walked through and said, "Oh my God, this is perfect." She hugged me. She took photos. She posted 3 of them to Instagram before the ceremony even started. Those posts went viral. Not a little viral, a lot viral. Her wedding photos featuring my arrangements got over 2 million likes across her platforms. Design blogs reposted them. Bridal magazines featured them. My DMs exploded, but there was a problem. Sloan had not credited me. Not in any of the posts, not in any of the reposts. When a commenter asked, "Who did the flowers?" Sloan replied, "My team, her team." I was her team, me, alone, in an avocado van at 5 in the morning. I messaged her, politely. I said, "Hey Sloan, could you tag me in the posts? It would really help my business." She did not respond. I followed up a week later. Nothing. Then I sent her an invoice for the remaining $13,000, the balance after the deposit. And that is when she responded. "Marisol, the exposure your work received from my wedding is worth far more than $13,000. Consider it a marketing opportunity. I will not be paying the balance." I read that message 4 times. I screenshot it and sent it to my sister. My sister called me and said words that are not appropriate for this story, but were entirely appropriate for the situation. I sent Sloan a formal demand letter. Her lawyer responded with a 4-page letter that essentially said, "You should be grateful." The letter used the phrase unprecedented exposure opportunity twice and brand building benefit 3 times. Nowhere in the letter did it mention the signed contract. Let me tell you about what 11 hours of flower work actually feels like, because I think people imagine it is peaceful and meditative and beautiful. It is not. It is brutal. My hands were cut in 4 places by thorns before 9 in the morning. My lower back was screaming by noon. I had not eaten since 5 because there was no time. Every minute counted when you are building a ceremony, arch from scratch with 600 individual stems that all need to be angled and secured and hydrated and not dead. The ceremony was at 4. By 3:45, I was on a ladder, wiring the last branch of olive into the top of the arch, sweating through my shirt with a piece of floral tape stuck to my cheek that I did not notice for an hour. One of the bridesmaids walked past me and said, "Oh my God, it is gorgeous." I said, "Thank you," from the top of the ladder with my mouth full of wire. That is what $18,000 of floral design looks like. Not Instagram, not golden hour photos. A woman on a ladder with bleeding hands and tape on her face, building something beautiful out of things that will be dead in 3 days. When Sloan said, "Exposure is compensation," I thought about those 11 hours. I thought about the thorns and the wire and the 5 in the morning alarm. And I thought, you cannot expose my landlord into not charging rent. You cannot expose the flower supplier into waiving the $7,300 I already paid. My sister put it more directly. She said, "Exposure is what you die of in the mountains." She is not wrong. I hired a lawyer. Her name was Camille Torres. She was a former event planner who went to law school at 35 because she was tired of watching vendors get cheated. She took my case for a flat fee that I could pay in installments. We filed a breach of contract claim. Sloan's lawyer, a man named Bennett Hyde, countered with the exposure argument. He actually tried to quantify the value of the Instagram posts. He hired a social media valuation expert who testified that the exposure Sloan provided was worth approximately $42,000. $42,000 in imaginary internet money. Camille did not even dignify that with a rebuttal. She presented the signed contract. She presented the deposit receipt. She presented my invoices. She presented my material costs, $7,300 in flowers, supplies, and rental equipment. Then she presented the voice messages. I had forgotten about these, but Camille had not. When Sloan first contacted me, she had sent me 47. Voice messages over the course of 3 weeks. Planning messages. Excited messages. Messages where she described exactly what she wanted and why only I could do it. Camille played 7 of them. The best one, the one that made Bennett Hyde close his folder, was this. Marisol, I literally cannot sleep. I keep looking at your work and I'm losing my mind. Nobody else does what you do. Nobody. I called 3 other florists and they were fine, but they were not you. You are an artist. I will pay whatever you ask. Just please say yes. I will pay whatever you ask. Camille let that sentence sit in the courtroom for about 10 seconds. Then she said, opposing counsel argues that exposure is compensation. My client's position is simpler. The defendant signed a contract. She paid a deposit. She received the work, and she owes the balance. I will pay whatever you ask is not a phrase typically associated with someone who intends to pay nothing. The judge ruled in my favor. Full balance plus interest, plus my legal fees. Sloan was ordered to pay $21,400. After the hearing, Sloan's assistant, not Sloan herself, approached me and said, Ms. Whitaker would like to know if you would be willing to do flowers for her sister's engagement party. I said, tell Ms. Whitaker that exposure does not pay my electric bill, but a signed contract and a full deposit would. I never heard from her again. My business has doubled since the trial, not because of the publicity, because I started putting a new clause in every contract. Exposure is not a form of payment. Full payment is a form of payment. Every client reads it. Most of them laugh. All of them pay. If you are a creative person, florist, photographer, designer, musician, anyone who makes beautiful things for other people, hear me. Your work has value, real, measurable. Pay your bills value. Do not let anyone tell you that being seen is the same as being paid. Being seen and being compensated are 2 different things, and you deserve both. Also, if someone sends you a voice message saying, I will pay whatever you ask, save it. You might need it later.